Ron Peters, whose small size enabled him to fit more easily into the narrow confines, made several abortive attempts to reach him, taking breaths of oxygen via a rubber tube. Then at around 3 a.m. the first of the doctors arrived. It was Flight Lieutenant John Carter, a medic from RAF Harper Hill, and from now on there would be a doctor on duty at the shaft at all times. Throughout that long night, everything that could be done was being done. Cavers and others had responded to the call-out. But arrival was slow and hampered by the lack of transport and home telephones, and to make matters worse, the country was now shrouded in thick fog. Oxygen had arrived in both small and large cylinders, but fresh cavers and more lamps were desperately needed. Around 8 a.m, those who remained of the original party were replaced. They were tired, cold, hungry and exhausted, but despite this didn't want to accept defeat. Les Salmon, who had already played a major role in the rescue, was to return yet again later in the day. Then the police took the unprecedented step of using the BBC News bulletins to broadcast an SOS appeal for more experienced cavers to assist in the rescue. At the same time, the British Oxygen Company was asked to supply large quantities of oxygen, which was ferried to the cave throughout the day. Lack of any hard facts meant that the morning papers carried mixed messages, which unfortunately gave rise to some confusion. But from the time of the broadcast, the rescue took on an entirely different aspect. It seemed the whole world was descending on Castleton and Peak Cavern. Cavers, media and onlookers, all anxious to help or seek news of progress. Chuck Hooley was one such experienced caver who responded to the broadcast. Chuck started caving in the 1940s and has been associated with the Derbyshire Cave Rescue Organisation for over 40 years.
It was on the midday news. I heard a general broadcast go out for any experienced cavers would be required to give a hand at the Neil Moss tragedy at Peak Cavern, because I think it was looking like a tragedy then and people were saying as such. So I left, I went home, I cycled to the work in those days, got in the van and got my gear and travelled up to Castleton, and confident I'd meet some of the Eldon Club there, because we were members of the Eldon Club by then. And when I got to Castleton, of course it was just an absolute sea of people congregating around all the approaches to Peak Cavern, and all the car parks were chock-a-block with vehicles and everything. So I thought, well, the only way I'm going to get there is to look like a caver. So there's no point in trying to find your way there as you were and meet somebody and say, you know, what can we do and who can we join? So I went on to one of the remote car parks and changed into my gear, and which was the overalls and the yellow goon suit and all that, and lamp, and that was my passport through the police and all the press and the cameramen, and I made my way through up to the cave, and got a story on what was happening, and there's a lot of activity at the sharp end, and there's a lot of carrying of equipment to and fro, and that was most of us were doing portering work back and forwards, and that was what was needed. And occasionally a man came out from the depths absolutely covered in mud, one of the people at the sharp end. I think some of the Pegasus Club were active then, and washed themselves off in the stream, which was a good media viewing for the cameras.
What sort of control was there on the gate then?
Well, there was a very firm control on the gate. I remember there was a chappie who I got to know quite well because I joined the Op Mole later on, and John Oatley, who was the leader of Op Mole, he's a big man. You don't argue with John, and he was on the gate, and he assessed people. Otherwise, the whole cavern would have been flooded with people.
So you've been with Cave Rescue now nearly 40 years, Derbyshire Cave Rescue. I mean, looking back on the Neil Moss situation, I mean, would things be different now if it happened again?
I feel myself that, like Neil Moss, if the same thing happened again, another person in a similar situation Once he'd lost the ability to help himself, he was, in the way he was jammed and everything, and the fact that you could not get another person even near to him to give help, the end result would probably be the same.
The sheer numbers of rescuers, media and additional visitors to the village during the course of Monday became a logistical nightmare. The youth hostel was the hub of activity for rest and recuperation, but the ladies of the WVS provided much needed sustenance and worked tirelessly throughout the whole course of the operation. Photographed with a cuppa was 17-year-old Ralph Johnson, who, with friend Brian Griffiths, was one of the 100 or so cavers who responded to the broadcast, arriving in the village around 9 p.m.
The village was heaving, wasn't it?
Yeah, people everywhere. But the youth hostel was the centre of operations,
That's right.
But the youth hostel was the focus. You sort of headed for the youth hostel.
Yeah, but went
Yeah.
to the youth hostel initially, got changed, didn't
We did, that's right.
and then
Yeah.
walked up here.
Yeah.
This is off your own bat.
Well, we must have said to people, you know, we're from Crew Cave and Pothole Club, we've heard about the message on the radio, we've come to help, and we must have said, well, youth hostel, you know, get changed, and then make your way up to the cave, which is what we did.
Must have left a kit down there.
We did, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So when you walked up the path towards the cave, what are your recollections of the...
But there was a lorry at the bottom, wasn't there, with oxygen bottles.
There was,
in it.
that's right. Yeah,
There's like a bit, you know, but his oxygen wagon
Yeah.
with bottles.
yeah. And there must have been someone coordinating things because we got dished out with, I did anyway, with a yellow Davis escape suit.
In here, in the vestibule?
Yes, in the vestibule, which I put on.
Were you asked to join a party, or were you just left?
I think we must have got split up at that point,
Yeah.
because I know I ended up, I was carrying a bottle, an oxygen bottle, and then somebody asked me to escort a guy in with a radio, with a telephone.
Civil defence.
Civil defence volunteer with a radio, a telephone, field telephone. And that was the last I saw you, I think.
Yeah, I don't know whether maybe you were in front of me because I know that I made my way in the cave, was carrying bottles bit, and I do remember crawling along with a stretcher bottle. And I also remember that was a field telephone already installed at this point because somebody when they wound the handle, they got electric
That
shock
was,
off it.
it was my fault, that was. I wound it up incorrectly, so every time you turn the handle, you got a
Electric
shock.
shock off it.
How did you feel at this time? Did you remember a sense of any...
Excited, I suppose.
Excited,
really,
I
at
think,
this point,
yeah,
But I mean, it wasn't, well, it didn't seem to be that serious at that point to me. You know, I mean, we knew there was an incident on, but,
No, it
you
just,
know, you were about, what were you, 18?
Yeah.
I'll be 17.
yeah, that's right.
You know, it was all, you know,
It was an adventure, wasn't it?
that's right.
Yeah.
You don't remember any particular difficulties, special difficulties?
Yeah, when you came into the muddy chamber,
Yeah.
it was like there was a logjam of people, really,
Was,
people
yeah.
trying to get out, people trying to get in, and also the mud was coming
Sliding
down the slope and blocking off the
Well, where the
end.
blokes digging to try and
Yeah,
keep
there was
it
a
clear.
constant job to keep it clear.
Yeah.
The chamber itself, can you remember what you actually experienced as you entered the chamber? Okay, fine.
The one thing that I do remember was when we got into the chamber that there was either one or two guys who were trying to dig their way through, smash their way through at a low level. Presumably they were trying to intersect with the tube which Neil Moss was in. And I do remember two people smashing away.
Non-starter onto the...
It was, yeah, I think so.
That must have been
Yeah,
5 or 6 metres through solid rock. I
yeah,
think.
but they were going at it.
Yeah, I think people are getting despondent at that
I
point.
think they probably were.
I think they'd realised now it was really very serious by
Yeah.
now.
Because you've been in there 30 hours,
Yeah,
haven't you?
Yeah, in fact, I think they'd thought by the time
They-
I got in, they were beginning to.
I think they decided they weren't going to get him out.
No, that's right.
I think the attempts that I made were really last-ditch attempts
Yeah.
because the rope had broken at least once. They got this, it's quite a thick piece of rope. And they've got these big hooks, like big,
Yeah,
remember
I
those?
yes, I
Like
do,
big
yeah.
steel hooks. So the idea was to go down and get them under his armpits. But it was a physical impossibility to do that. You know.
So you were asked to go down the shaft itself then?
Yeah.
What were you given to go down with?
I stripped off my boiler suit and so I stood there in my thermal long johns and sports jacket. And they gave me an oxygen mask,
Yeah.
which didn't really fit. You had to sort of have it dangle around your neck.
Yeah.
And if you wanted oxygen, you shouted for it, they turned it on and you put it on. But there was an oxygen line down to him, quite a thick one, I remember,
Yeah.
about an inch and a half diameter maybe. There was a piece of rope to him, a ladder, and then a rope to me. It was quite cluttered, I felt, down there.
Yeah.
And to be honest, at this point I realised it was quite frightening. I thought I was unhappy, but I climbed down. I could stand on him, but it was that tight I couldn't actually see him. I couldn't turn my head.
Climb down the second shaft, down to the second part.
Yeah, you climb down. There's like a bit of a dog leg.
There's a bit of a dog leg, that's right.
And you got past the dog leg, and then you could actually stand on him. But to be honest, I don't think I did anything constructive. You felt as though you were doing something useful, but by this time he was unconscious, possibly even dead, but he was certainly unconscious. I remember some groans inside when I actually first arrived in the chamber, but I don't remember anything. I suppose I'd been there an hour before I went down. I don't remember any sign of life while I was actually in the shaft.
Brian, but you have a story to tell about.
Yeah, I think the time when I got there, it was after Jake, as you called him then, Ralph now. It was, and I was sent down to down the tube to see whether I could hear any signs of life, because I think they were really. Was there a doctor in the chamber?
Yes,
I think there was. Yeah.
Hugh Kidd.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I think he wanted to know whether there's any signs of life, because I think they were beginning to think that was possibly dead. And I remember that I went being asked if I would go down the tube, and I said, well, I would. Had this same business of the oxygen mask and so on, and I was pretty agitated about all this. Well, it was scary, you know. Anyway, I went down, and I remember the dog leg and everything, and I had some chocolate with me, and when I got down to, and I could see his top of his helmet sort of down here, and I remember dropping a piece of chocolate. It was Cadbury's chocolate. I thought, well, you know,
If he came round, he would.
at least there was some food there.
Also in the chamber at the same time as Ralph and Brian was Buxton medical practitioner Hugh Kidd. A keen caver and a valuable asset to the DCRO team, I asked him how he'd come to be called out.
Oh, by the police. They worked their way through the young doctors, and they started with flying officer Carter, as he then was, from Harper Hill. Those days there was an RAF station in Buxton. And then they had the Dr. Willis, Geoffrey Willis, because he was a previous medical officer at Harper Hill, RAF. And I think they picked up the next youngest, which was me.
Did you go willingly? Do you remember?
Oh, quite willingly, yes, yeah. And I went into the Neil Moss rescue with a team from the Upper Wharfdale Fell Rescue Unit. Right. I wasn't there very long till I was into the rope walk and being kitted out with a borrowed helmet and light and a goon suit that they had in those days, and being escorted down underground by the Upper Wharfdale team. I think there must have been 6 or 8 people in the chamber, and when our team arrived, another team almost immediately left. So the numbers didn't rise. They stayed fairly static. Somebody must have been organising it fairly well for teams crossing over.
And do you remember the first sort of impressions you got as you approached the chamber?
Yeah, fairly disastrous, because the chaps there had been working for hours and hours and getting nowhere. And it seemed fairly obvious, even to an amateur like me, that they weren't going to get anywhere. They'd given up attempts at hauling him or the ladder up the shaft. That had been given up as being quite totally unsuccessful, and they were simply drilling through the rock. A lot of frustration on the part of the drillers, who must have known very well they weren't going to get there from the start, but they had to make an attempt, I suppose. But it was patently obvious they weren't going to get through 15 feet of rock in time to save anyone's life. I think it was a forlorn rescue attempt from the start. And talking to his parents later, he was a very tall chap, Neil, and one presumed, and no proof, that he got stuck with a leg or a foot, an ankle through the ladder.
I've heard tell that the atmosphere in the chamber was made even more gloomy by the sound of Neil's breathing. Is that something you recall?
Only when you listened for it. At the time I was there on the Monday evening, a rock drill was at work, and it wasn't until you stopped the drill that you could hear the breathing. His breathing was conducted up the tube he was in quite well. And as the hours went by, it became irregular in a pattern of breathing known as Cheyne-Stokes respiration, which builds up in a crescendo, dies down into a diminuendo, stops for a short time, and then the whole process starts again. And eventually, with death ensuing, respiration stops, obviously. So it was clear to me that with the Cheyne-Stokes respiration, death was imminent, and eventually, again stopping the drill from time to time to hear how his respiration was going, he was no longer breathing. It was the only time in my life I've ever certified someone's death without being able to see the body.
I mean, do you think it could happen again like that?
I think if it happened again, the results would be the same. I can't see how we could have got him out. How anyone could have got him out. No, I can't.
Hugh Kidd had certified the death of Neil Moss at around 3 a.m. on Tuesday morning. His fight for life had lasted for some 35 hours before the cold and foul air proved too much. The circumstances were shocking and unique and were to change the once carefree attitudes to caving forever. The sad news was passed to Chief Inspector Sheffield, who made the official announcement to waiting press, having first informed the coroner and Neil's parents. Neil's father, who was staying in Castleton, kept in regular contact with his wife during their agonising and very public wait for news of their son. When it was announced that the morning's outbreak of rain might cause flooding in restricted areas of the cave, their first thought was for the safety of the rescuers. They wished no one to put their lives at risk in any further attempts to recover the body, and felt that all that could be done had been done. The authorities would now need time to discuss the legal implications of conducting an inquest without a body. And so the greatest cave rescue attempt this country has ever seen came to an end, and the chamber was once more allowed to fall silent. Equipment and remaining rescuers, many still caked with mud and exhausted after so many hours underground, were ordered out and the cave closed to the public until after the inquest. Though as a mark of respect, the show cave lights remained burning. Unprecedented numbers of people and organisations from all over the country were involved, including over 150 cavers. An interest in the dark and uniquely tragic events was deep and far-reaching. Many hadn't ventured underground before, and for some the ordeal proved too much. But others battled bravely on to give what help they could.
From Castleton set out the team of rescuers on their last bid to save Neil Moss. The young man was trapped far in
The media reporters also had a job to do, which was made more difficult by their lack of real news and photos from the actual site.
The only people that really knew what was going on were the cavers who were doing the work, and their messages went through to the police, and the police of course were giving announcements to the press. It was controlled very well in that respect.
This resulted in some understandable inventiveness in the papers, with exaggerated scale and difficulty, like the 2 3/4 mile journey to the chamber, and this rather lurid work of pure fiction, allegedly written by one of the rescuers. One effect of all this was to heighten the public perception that anyone that caved was mad. Some even wanted to ban it altogether. Although the rescue attempt was a valiant team effort, sections of the media created their own stars, which included June Bailey, a young photogenic female caver, specially imported and credited with all manner of heroics. She subsequently found further but fleeting fame through journals, including Parry Match and a leading women's magazine. However, one journalist, News Chronicle freelance Jim Lovelock, stood out from the rest since he had caving and rescue experience and was able to give a much more balanced view of events. Les Salmon, one of the real heroes of the rescue, subsequently bore the brunt of the inevitable questions on the reasons for the failure to get Neil out alive. The strain was enormous, and although he, along with other rescuers, was completely exonerated of all blame at the later inquest, he was to die only 5 years later. The aftermath also brought with it a fair degree of soul-searching among the rescue services, including the DCRO, and I asked Chuck what the likely outcome would be today in the event of a similar incident.
I think if it happened again, knowledge of the problems involved at the time, particularly of foul air, I think would be paramount, and I'm sure that we would probably do more now with the modern equipment we've got of getting the fresh air supply down there. We know a lot more about CO2 and its effect than we ever did then. The organisation would be better, it would be smoother, it would be more controlled. There'd be more than enough skilled people and help there, and we wouldn't be so surprised as we were in those days. You were suddenly faced with something and you weren't equipped to deal with it.
The incident became a catalyst for a complete overhaul of the DCRO.
When it was all over and settled down, a meeting was called by all the people involved at the time and the cavers of the area. I had a meeting at Castleton at one of the pubs, and the whole thing was organised there. It was really the start of the new Derbyshire Cave Rescue organisation. I offered to become the equipment officer as an engineer. I then got permission from the youth hostel warden of the day.
Jim Powell, I think, wasn't it?
I can't remember his name, because the donations that were given by the public towards this rescue, they wanted to do something to commemorate Neil Moss, so they kitted out one of the bedrooms in the youth hostel, and they put a little plaque there in memory